All right, let's turn back to the White House and President Trump's decision to raise tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from 25 to 50%.
We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
Canadian steel and aluminum producers say it will have a devastating effect.
The latest tariffs.
Factories have now fallen silent. The machines remain in place. The production lines are not broken. But the only difference is that the workers have disappeared. More than 100,000 jobs vanished overnight, and the reason was not modern robots replacing labor, nor a flood of cheap imports. It all started with a single policy change, the imposition of a 50% tariff on aluminium. When it was introduced, this decision was promoted as a measure to protect American workers, a pledge to restore the strength of domestic manufacturing, but the result was the exact opposite. Plants shut down en masse, workers received layoff notices, and disillusionment spread across communities that had once placed their hopes in the policy. While many towns in the United States slipped into widespread unemployment, Canada quietly was reaping the benefits. Now, even those who once supported the measure have begun to harbor doubts. So, what exactly happened? Could this be an early signal of a much larger economic earthquake on the horizon? Let's go back to 2018. At that time, the US government imposed a 10% tariff on imported aluminium. The stated goals were to bolster national security, reduce dependence on foreign supply, and above all, bring jobs back to American smelters. The policy was warmly welcomed by the public. The thinking then was straightforward: protect domestic industry, protect workers. But as time passed, that 10% figure did not stay put. By 2025, the tariff had surged to 25% and then was abruptly doubled to 50%. The striking point was that this new tariff did not just target rivals, it also covered close allies like Canada. The world began to take notice. The US president at the time, in a speech in Pennsylvania, confidently pledged, "We will revive the aluminium industry stronger than ever before." The crowd applauded, but few realized that a crisis was quietly taking shape. Aluminium is not an ordinary material. It underpins many critical sectors, from construction and automobile production to aerospace. Yet, producing aluminium requires enormous amounts of electricity. It is among the most energy-intensive industries in the world. Just to smelt a single ton of aluminium consumes enough electricity to power a household for half a year. In the United States, where power is far from cheap, this posed a daunting challenge. In contrast, the situation in Canada was entirely different. Thanks to abundant hydroelectric resources, Canadian smelters, particularly in Quebec, enjoyed power that was both cheap and stable, and that gave them a decisive edge. Industrial electricity rates in Quebec hovered around 4.5 cents per kilowatt-hour. In many US industrial states, that price was double. In places like Ohio and Kentucky, during peak hours, power costs could climb even higher. That gap alone was enough to create a massive competitive disadvantage. As a result, even with a 50% tariff on imported aluminium, American smelters still could not recover. Barriers were erected, but no real support accompanied them. Even Alcoa, one of the largest aluminium companies in the US, had to speak out. They made it clear, without cheap and reliable electricity, there is no way to restart production. Their CEO even bluntly declared that you cannot run an aluminium smelter on promises alone. Greater than. We would be looking for an energy policy that supports a plant like this that will be around for 20, 30, and 40 years. The US government's decision to raise aluminium tariffs certainly generated waves of attention in politics and the media. But what it did not provide was the ability for manufacturers to pay their monthly utility bills. While policymakers delivered fiery speeches about protecting domestic jobs on the ground, businesses dependent on aluminium were forced to tighten their belts just to survive. No one expected that a single change in tariffs would send material costs soaring so dramatically, and the consequences followed a predictable path. Rising expenses forced many companies to scale back production. Some tried to hold on by reducing working hours, others were compelled to cut staff, and some even chose to relocate entire production lines abroad to save costs. In the end, instead of reviving the jobs that were lost, as the policy originally promised, the aluminium tariff cost the industry tens of thousands more. For some, it was still a necessary protectionist measure, but for many others it was described bluntly as a fatal blow to the labor market, a job killer striking right at home. And what is most striking is that business leaders were not the only ones sounding the alarm. The concern has spread beyond American borders. Countries with close trading ties to the US, led by Canada, are watching Washington's every move with sharp caution. No one in Ottawa has delivered fiery speeches or staged combative press conferences, but Canada is not silent. While the US has erected ever higher trade barriers, Canada has chosen a different path, measured, steady, and effective. And surprisingly, it is precisely this approach that is helping Canada rise. The question now is, what is really happening north of the border? The answer, in truth, is not overly complicated. Instead of retaliating with counter-tariffs or exerting pressure on the international stage, Canada has chosen to double down on what it already has: clean, affordable energy, coupled with a stable and reliable global trading network. This is not a lucky accident, but the product of a long-term strategy built over many years. Aluminium smelters in Quebec, the country's largest production hub, have continued operating steadily. Some have even expanded, investing in new equipment and hiring engineers. Orders have begun pouring in from around the world, particularly from Europe and Asia, markets that now view Canada as a far more reliable supplier than the United States. At the same time, in American industrial towns, production lines have fallen silent. Workers leave factories carrying their personal belongings, faces marked by disappointment. While American workers endure a bleak chapter, Canada is accelerating. Figures from Alcoa, one of the industry's biggest names, show that more than 100,000 jobs in the US have disappeared since the aluminium tariff was imposed. Once dismissed as an exaggeration, this number has now been confirmed. Even more troubling, it may continue to rise. Of these, around 20,000 jobs belong directly to the smelting industry, skilled high-value positions often rooted in long-established industrial communities. These are not just dry statistics. They represent thousands of families losing their main source of income, small towns watching factories go dark for good, and industrial dreams gradually fading away. In contrast, in Canada, especially Quebec, where more than 90% of the country's aluminium is produced, smelters continue to thrive thanks to stable hydroelectric power. The combination of sustainable energy and prudent trade policy has created an undeniable competitive advantage. And while American workers grapple with unemployment benefits, Canada is opening up new positions. This is not random fortune. It is the result of steadfastly pursuing a different path, one that is neither aggressive nor noisy, yet is clearly producing a very different outcome. In Quebec, the heart of Canada's aluminium industry, more than 90% of the nation's output is produced in plants powered by hydroelectric electricity. This is not just a technical detail, it is the very foundation of Canada's competitive strength in the global aluminium market, with clean, stable, and significantly cheaper electricity compared to industrial regions in the United States. These plants are able to keep operating continuously and in many cases even expand production, even as global trade conditions grow more difficult. Meanwhile, US smelters face the opposite reality. Many have been forced to cut back because of crippling electricity costs compounded by trade barriers that have made operations increasingly inefficient. Running an energy-hungry smelter without access to affordable power is like charging headlong into a brick wall. In the first 3 months of 2025, as the US situation grew increasingly suffocating, Canada recorded a 12% increase in aluminium output, enough to offset much of the shortfall caused by Washington's new tariff policy. Before tariffs were imposed, Canada supplied nearly 60% of America's aluminium imports, but instead of responding harshly when Washington suddenly slapped on a 50% tariff, Ottawa took another path. There were no fiery declarations, no retaliatory duties. Instead, Canada quietly expanded its international partnerships, boosted trade with the EU and Asian nations, and continued to support renewable energy, policies that have long underpinned the resilience of its domestic smelting industry. That calm, deliberate approach has surprised many experts abroad. At first, there was widespread belief that Canada would suffer badly from US protectionism, but the reality has been the exact opposite. Smelters in Quebec and British Columbia have not weakened, they are hiring aggressively. Engineers, technicians, operators, new production lines are being installed, and orders are pouring in from markets that once relied heavily on American supply. For many multinationals, abandoning the US was not a preferred choice. But with production costs spiraling, especially after the 50% tariff, they had no alternative but to pivot. An aerospace company headquartered in Toronto put it bluntly, with tariffs like that, continuing to source aluminium from the US is impossible. Nobody does business to lose money. This shift is happening at remarkable speed. Along with it, Canada's position as a center of clean aluminium, both in terms of energy and process, is being powerfully reinforced. For many Canadians, this is not a moment for loud celebration, but one of quiet pride. Pride in seeing their country hold its ground, stay the course amidst political turbulence, and continue investing in long-term sustainability. An operations engineer in Saguenay, a region long considered the backbone of Quebec's smelting industry, put it simply in a brief conversation. "We thought America's policies would drag us down." He shook his head slightly and smiled. Instead, they shot themselves in the foot. Behind the figures and the humming production lines are real lives. Every American worker who leaves a factory with a layoff notice in hand represents a new job opening in Canada. The reversal is stark, and though there is regret over the weakening of what was once a tightly bound trade relationship, Canadians understand this. In a volatile world, staying on the right course is what matters most. The lesson from the past remains clear and painful. Tariffs on their own cannot salvage a system that is already crumbling from within. Without comprehensive measures to lower domestic production costs or serious investment in industrial infrastructure, any protectionist policy is nothing more than a temporary raincoat in the middle of a long storm. What is striking is how closely today's aluminium crisis mirrors the steel saga of the past. The same mindset of imposing high tariffs to shield an industry, the same belief that jobs would return, and once again, the domino effect is rippling across the supply chain. From smelters to consumer manufacturing, from major corporations to small suppliers, analysts now warn if this cycle continues, the damage will not be confined to aluminium alone. The automotive, aerospace, and even agricultural sectors, all reliant on global supply chains, could become the next casualties. Perhaps that is why more and more eyes are turning north to Canada, a country that has chosen not to respond with anger or bluster, but with persistence, strategy, and long-term investment. No shock statements, no grandstanding press conferences. Yet, Canada has steadily reinforced its production system and is now reaping the rewards. While American workers worry about tomorrow's jobs, many Canadians are asking themselves, perhaps the path we have chosen, quiet, unglamorous, but steady, is in fact the better one. Maybe it is time for a thorough reassessment, not just to tally winners and losers in a trade dispute, but to determine whether current policies are truly serving the long-term interests of the people. Because if inertia prevails, by the time the damage is recognized, it may well be irreversible. What do you think? Are we witnessing an inevitable outcome, or is there still room to change course? Share your perspective in the comments.